Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 30 on Thursdays. Oops, I'm hearing someone's, okay. Our bi-weekly SharePoint webinar series. This week we are going to talk about SharePoint security. But before we get into that, housekeeping, as I mentioned, we have, this is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series we've been doing for about 2.5 years. And we cover anything and everything related to SharePoint. Our next webinar is coming up on August 29th. We're going to cover user adoption. This time it's personal, so some of the specific things in and around user adoption, you won't want to miss that one. You get the full schedule. We have the scheduled out, I think, all the way into late September, even in October, at sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. You can get our full schedule. Today's session is being recorded. You can get to it at our website at sharepoint.protiviti.com/archive-webinars. We'll have it up probably within a day. Sometime tomorrow it'll be up and available to view. So if you need to duck out early, you can get back and get to the whole presentation today. And if you do have questions as we go through the material, you can use the question window located in GoToWebinar there on your right. I will moderate the session, and we'll typically leave the questions till the very end and just make sure Mike has enough time to get through all this material. Oops. Looks like PowerPoint crashed on me. I'll pop this back up here. There we go. If you're interested in any other education, we have a whole slew of courses that we have recorded and available on our website. You can get all that at sharepoint.protiviti.com. We cover everything from InfoPath training to document management to metadata, things like that. So if you like this format of web-based training, we have a whole bunch of material available for you on our website. So without further ado, we're going to get into today's topic. Today's session, as I mentioned, is SharePoint Security Triage. Our presenter is Mike Fleck from CipherPoint, and again, I'm your moderator, Steve Witt. I'm with Protiviti. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here. And folks, thanks for joining. All right, and I'm now the presenter, so let me share the correct screen. Okay, Steve, keep me honest. Can you see the let's get started?
I certainly can. Looks good.
Great. All right. So, folks, the idea, Steve and I were talking about this earlier. It's 30 on Thursday, not 60 on Thursday. And security is a pretty broad and complex topic. So the idea with this 30 on Thursday is just quickly identify some of the top SharePoint security issues that we've seen in the field, and then give some quick guidance on how you can tackle them. And you guys have probably already read this at this point, or you know the definition of the word triage. But there's obviously an emergency room connotation here. I didn't think it was really appropriate to refer to SharePoint as a patient that was coming in hemorrhaging. But again, the notion here, let's pick out what really the big risk items are, the most common items are, what we see in respect to SharePoint security, and give you some actionable pointers on where you can go to try and address those issues. And then obviously beyond the content in here, the folks from Protiviti, the folks from CipherPoint, happy to help entertain questions or jump on a phone with you outside of this webinar and get into any specifics about your environment. Something else just to qualify, we don't believe that SharePoint is inherently insecure. It is an open and a flexible platform, and openness and flexibility often come at the expense of security. You have the same kind of dynamic with the Windows operating system. There's so many different ways you can extend it, so many different ways you can integrate with it. All of those create security issues, and that's okay, right? The second bullet there, it's not called SecurePoint, it's called SharePoint. The basic notion of it is to make things available. So twofold, if you have information that you don't want to make available, it probably shouldn't be in SharePoint. right? It should probably be locked up and highly secured and physically isolated somewhere. If you have sensitive information or regulated information that you have to make available, SharePoint, when properly secured, can be suitable for those use cases. It's just a function of really understanding what you need to do and getting SharePoint kind of whipped into shape for those environments. And just some examples here. I mean, we see this, the healthcare industry, federal government, those are industries that have to collaborate. They have to share information. They have to find ways to reduce risk, reduce costs, but they also have very significant security sensitivities or privacy compliance regulations that they have to contend with. So, and it's actually a little hard to pick three. And again, mostly in the spirit of time here, but these are some of the more common ones that we've seen, and we believe the impact of these are big. So insecure configuration, basically it's very easy to set up SharePoint. It's somewhat challenging to set up SharePoint according to the security best practices. And also I still see a lot of, circa 1995 network security thinking when it comes to SharePoint, intranets, and things like that. And really what I mean by that is that many organizations don't use these principles of what are called defense in depth that are very common in kind of internet-connected transactional database environments or e-commerce environments. And you just haven't seen that same discipline and thought process in large part applied to SharePoint. Second, there's often a lack of awareness in terms of what kind of information is actually stored in SharePoint. I think a lot of this stems from an over-reliance on end users to police themselves. But honestly, I see it just in terms of folks are busy. I've had several conversations with security architects, vice presidents of IT at large companies, and they look at SharePoint and they understand they probably have a security problem there. They have so much else on their plate, they're really just not willing to go look to see whether and how big a problem they might have. And third, permissions do not equal security. And this is one of the big areas where I've seen the awareness and the level of sophistication really improve over the last 2 to 3 years. So the mindset is changing, but historically permissions have been viewed as the real security functionality in SharePoint. And what I tell people is permissions are a component of security. So permissions are necessary and you have to do a good job with them, but they're not entirely sufficient in terms of the controls you need to secure sensitive information. So the first one here, hardening, and just some things to look at, testing and applying the latest cumulative updates for SharePoint. Review when those cumulative updates come out, identify which cumulative updates have critical security patches, and then work to get those patches tested and applied as soon as possible, especially if you're dealing with internet-connected or extranet type scenarios. And a lot of this is because the SharePoint teams are often very small, and they aren't always fully integrated into an overall kind of policies and procedures around change management. So that's really kind of the first thing you can do, regardless of how you've configured your SharePoint environment. You can start doing this right away. Next, disable the SharePoint install account. That account has a lot of privilege. You're still going to need that account from time to time, but go into Active Directory and disable that account, and try and get some controls around enabling that account and making use of it. It doesn't have to be something hard and fast. If you have a ticketing system, it could be along the lines of, it only gets enabled if you've opened a ticket, and then, there's some, auditing that's done to make sure that only the work requested in the ticket is performed with that install account. Third one here, again, just kind of a basic hardening step. Make sure the loopback check is enabled. This one to me is kind of entertaining. Microsoft gets a lot of static for not being secure, which I don't think is fair. And this loopback check is actually a security feature that they put in, and into SharePoint, and it is secure by default. This loopback check should be enabled for security reasons, and one of the first things that we see folks do is disable it. There are some very common and really useful automated installation tools for SharePoint that will, their default behavior is to disable this loopback check. It's a registry setting. Make sure that you have it set correctly, which is to have it enabled. Next one here, don't use shared admin accounts. This is a big deal. Administrators have a lot of privilege. They have full access to SharePoint content. If they don't have it by default, they can get it. And then also they can make changes, and those changes can result in downtime. And it's hard to track, who did what if everybody's using the same account. So have unique accounts for all of your SharePoint and your database and your systems administrators. Really the only, you should have some service accounts in there, obviously, but folks should be doing work with their unique named administrator accounts. Next one here is disable unused services. SharePoint has different editions, Foundation, Standard, Enterprise, that come with certain services enabled out of the box. Just go through and turn things off that you aren't using. It's just less to worry about. It reduces what's called your attack surface, which is the different venues that someone can try and compromise an environment. And again, this is basic hardening, just like you would do at a server level. You turn off Windows services and shut down ports that you're not going to use. Do the same thing at the application level with SharePoint. Working to the last two here, NIST, National Institute of Standards, have various configuration checklists. They have them for Windows Server, they have them for SharePoint or MOS 2007, SharePoint Server 2010. They don't have one yet for 2013, but it's a great checklist. It walks you through step-by-step preparing for a secure configuration of SharePoint, what you're supposed to do in terms of settings and service accounts and why, so you kind of understand the process as you're going through it. I've used these for a lot of different environments, not just SharePoint, but I've used them for different Microsoft and non-Microsoft server environments, and they're very good. You can Google that and download it off the internet. And then finally, if you are doing an extranet use, dedicate a web front end for that external use. Choose the right authentication provider, for that web application. And isolate it with good network perimeter defenses. I talk about this in some of my talks. Liam Cleary from Protiviti has a lot of information on different use case scenarios and different kind of farm topology recommendations in terms of where in the network to put different servers and firewalls and things like that to put in between them. And what we see a lot of is, especially with single server farms, people may or may not extend a web application, and then they'll just punch a hole through their firewall, and really that you're letting folks from the internet straight into your farm, and it's just not a good idea. You have to provide some defenses and multiple lines of defenses there, so it takes somebody more effort to try and compromise your environment from the outside. Issue number 2 around awareness. We've heard it several times. We ask folks, do you have sensitive information in SharePoint? And sometimes the answer is, oh no, we don't. All of our users de-identify data, or they know not to put certain information in there. And the fact is, that may be true, but you need to go verify. We've seen instances where contractors, temps who are there for a month were uploading a bunch of credit card numbers into a location in SharePoint because that was the only place they were given to store their information. So your employees may be doing a great job, and they may be well educated on the things to do and not do and how to do them, but you have all kinds of people walking your organization who are not as well trained. So there's an old axiom in security, which is trust but verify. So it's fine to trust your users, but verify that they're doing the right things. So step 1 is figure out what kind of information you really have. From a shameless self-promotion standpoint, CipherPoint provides tool that allow you to locate and identify sensitive data. You could just do this by walking down the hall and asking the human resources department or the finance department or compliance or legal, whatever. I mean, identify some of the departments that you know are likely to have high-risk data or high-impact data and go ask them. Alternatively, with permission, you can just sample. Go look in maybe 30 different libraries and open 10 different files and see what you find. But the point is, don't just take things at face value. Put in a little bit of effort and time to go see whether or not things are really happening as they should. And then really when you find sensitive information, it's really not a function of if. When you find sensitive information in SharePoint, you then need to ask the business, does this need to be there, right? Is SharePoint fulfilling a business function that requires this information to reside in SharePoint? And then if it does, you're on to steps 3 and 4. So, okay, great. I mean, we fundamentally want SharePoint to be important to the business. So if they've found a way to use it, and that way is business critical, that's a good thing for SharePoint. That's a good thing for the SharePoint administrators and developers within the company. But what does this mean from a risk standpoint? Either what industry or legislative requirements from a security control standpoint apply to this information, or in larger organizations you'll see that there are often standards. So a good example would be just about all the federal government agencies now have a set of requirements around handling personally identifiable information, right? Social security numbers, home addresses, those types of things. So even if it's not something very obvious like a credit card number or healthcare information, your organization might have internal standards and guidelines for things that you have to do. And then the final piece then is sort of create a roadmap for yourself to get to where you need to be. We've talked to folks who found themselves, neck deep in sensitive information in SharePoint and a bunch of compliance regulations that they had to deal with, and they were very intimidated because the assumption was that they kind of had to throw a light switch and fix the whole thing all at once. And we talked them through the fact that you have to understand where you are today, you have to understand where you need to be, and then plot a course and show progress against that course, and you'll be okay. So this isn't something that anybody expects you to be able to do in a weekend, but the point is get aware, right? Understand how you're using that, understand what the implications of that use are, and then understand how you're going to get yourself to where you need to be in terms of administrative and technical security controls. And then finally, permissions and then some. So I said, permissions are challenging, right? So I mean, part of the problem is permissions and permissions management. Part of the problem is, I think, an over-reliance on permissions as, the security control in SharePoint. So first thing you have to do is get good permissions, right? We acknowledge that. And it reduced a pretty complex task into one bullet. So define what your permissions should be. And this is a triage unto itself. But who needs access to what information, right? And then there are lots of scripts on the internet that you can run to identify what permission settings actually are, and then you're going to have to go through the effort to analyze those based on the definitions that you have or have created. Once you have that fixed, activity logging is very good, so we know who has access to it, and we're tracking what they're doing to that information. So if we think we lost it, we can go back and look to see who touched it. And then these are not necessarily in order. And classify sites based on business impact. One of the ways to get the behavior out of users that you expect is to be in their face. So tag the sites. Make part of the site template a banner that says, this is high business impact, or this is confidential, or restricted and regulated information. Act accordingly. You still need to trust but verify, but you've got to give them some active feedback here. And then finally, we see this across industries. A very big initiative right now is data at rest encryption, especially for regulated data. There are a lot of what are called safe harbor provisions, and it's just a very effective way to show that you've been a good custodian of that data, you've done all the due diligence you've kept with your peer group. again, no system will ever be 100% secure. It's about doing the right things and showing that you took your responsibility seriously. I know we're kind of getting short on time. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So just some resources. First bullet there, anything by Liam Cleary. He has a blog. He has some things out on slideshare.net. You know, I very, very insightful and interesting collateral or content that Liam is coming up with. And these are my words, not his, so it might not be accurate, but my outside read on it is, you know, he found that this was very interesting to him. He's sort of on a journey, so you can kind of take that security awareness journey with Liam, and I think it's all great. It's very good information, and I think it's just kind of cool to see him on that path. I mentioned those checklists. You know, you could almost Google the text in that bullet. It should take you right there. And then there's a database, CVE, Common Vulnerabilities. I forgot what the E stands for. But it's basically just about every mainstream technology out there. They categorize and track all the vulnerabilities. So go look at the list of vulnerabilities for SharePoint, track those to the KBs published by Microsoft, and make sure you're up to date. And then finally, there's a community site dedicated just to SharePoint security issues, SharePoint-defenseinDepth.com. It is a bit of a mouthful, admittedly. But you know, if you have questions, you can try them there. Again, folks from Protiviti, folks from CipherPoint, you know, enthusiastic about helping, but that's another resource at your disposal. So that's it. I know I did a lot of talking and a lot of talking quickly. I was trying to fit this in the 30 minutes. So Steve, I'll pass it back to you for Q&A.
No, that was great. And we have some questions coming in. And I'll ask people to keep them coming in through the chat window. The first one's pretty long, so I'm going to do a quick read of it first because it looks like it's a multi-part question.
My favorite.
This is a very specific, this might even be a better one for Liam, but I'll ask this one to you, Mike. So this user has time to time gets an error in SharePoint 2013. The content has expired and can no longer be used. The common remedy is often offered online is to check the time zone on the web application with the server time zone, and the ultimate fix is disable web page security validation. Could you point out that which is what that disabling can lead to, or are you familiar with you know, maybe what some of the security is associated with disabling that particular feature?
You know, I could only guess, to be honest, but since we're all here, I'll do that. Yeah, I mean, just based on a couple of those nuggets with time zones and things like that, a lot of times what you'll have on websites, especially with you know, web forms and things, is, yeah, to expire them. You see this too, especially with SSL or HTTPS things, is there's a tolerance, a time tolerance for a difference in time between say the client and the server, and it'd be it could be a time zone thing, which would surprise me because they should all be using system time, but it's conceivable that that is the issue. You know, I honestly, guys, I hesitate to follow any public forum guidance that just out of hand says, you know, disable some security feature without explaining what that security feature is and why you do, or, you know, why you would or would not disable it. But yeah, I mean, just to be candid, that might be a better one for Liam.
Yeah, but that's a good point, though. I mean, anytime, you know, that the fix to a problem results in less security, I think is something that should be done with a lot of diligence, a lot of care.
Yeah, just be informed, and obviously that's what this person's trying to do because they asked the question. But I will, after this, either I or someone on my team will do a little bit of searching on that. If we come up with any nuggets, I'll get them back to you, Steve.
Great. Second part of that question, kind of unrelated, but what possible, and this I'd be interested in your take on this, Mike, is what possible security issues do you see with SharePoint Online?
Yeah, well, so I'll try and reduce this down to 2 sentences. So the first sentence, Microsoft has a giant security budget and a bunch of security engineers and architects. So from a SharePoint, from an infrastructure security and network defense standpoint, great security. The big issue that I have with the cloud is the implied and required trust in the cloud provider. I'm not really there yet. I don't really care who the cloud provider is. But then also the loss of control. We have a SharePoint portal. We put our human resources, our legal, our intellectual property, all kinds of information on there. I inherently feel better about all that information being inside, our four walls and behind firewalls and VPN. I'm not at a point where I feel comfortable with that information in the cloud, regardless of how good Microsoft's core security is. That is solvable, right, through technology. But that to me, that's the difference.
And I think that leads beautifully into this person's third question, which is, any recommendations on third-party activity logging, and do you think some of the auditing tools and other tools will be available for SharePoint Online that can further maybe increase that trust? Or maybe you're okay putting it in the cloud, but you would feel better if you had some other third-party tools in there, and knowing that you have a little bit more control and visibility of that.
Yeah, so I mean, relative to, let me see if I can back up just as a backdrop. So relative to our top three, I mean, Microsoft has gone through great pains to provide a secure configuration. So you've kind of taken that one. I think you still have the lack of awareness issues. You still have, permissions does not equal security type of things. But yeah, specifically to the question, we've heard, and we're working on this from a CipherPoint standpoint, we heard from enterprises that they will start adopting the cloud when they can have their information be encrypted in the cloud, and they, the enterprise, can own the encryption key. The cloud provider should not own the encryption key. So that's part of it. From an auditing standpoint, I'm seeing more kind of compliance, auditing and compliance type solutions for the non-Microsoft cloud things, quite honestly. Again, shameless self-promotion, but CipherPoint, we are working on that, and we'll have something this year that deals with a lot of these cloud issues, including auditing.
Nice. And then one last question. If you go back to your bullet point number 3, you do mention encryption. You just mentioned it again, talking about the cloud. Do you have any data that gives you an idea of like how much encrypting is going on in SharePoint, or how many people are using some level of encryption with their SharePoint environment?
Great question. I don't. Historically, I mean, it really before the existence of CipherPoint, you really had two options. Option one was more of a check-the-box type approach, which is to enable SQL TDE. That presumes you're not using remote blob storage. And just anecdotally, we heard from folks that, yeah, we can do it and it's well documented. We heard a lot of, I don't know if they were real or perceived, issues around performance. SharePoint's a pretty I/O intensive application, and doing encryption at the database layer with an I/O intensive application is tough. But I think part of it too, the adoption of content encryption in SharePoint is going to be directly proportional to the level of awareness of what information you have. And I think folks are really probably about 6 months into kind of a big market level awareness.
Great. No, appreciate that. And if you don't mind going back to your last slide, I think that does it for the questions, Mike. I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon. This was great, very educational. If you have any questions, maybe some follow-on, you want to dive deeper, you want to learn more about what CipherPoint does, Mike's contact information is up there, or you can get a hold of me. My contact information is up there. So I think if there's no more questions, that will conclude today's 30 on Thursday. We will see you again in 2 weeks, where we're going to talk about user adoption. Thanks again, Mike.
All right, thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.